Andrew and Tristan Tate have finally been released from prison after 3.5 months in Romanian jail. They're on house arrest, so they can go back to their residency, but they're still tethered to that legal system. Now, this is after false accusations were made about trafficking charges, and we actually saw evidence that exonerated the Tates, and they were never formally charged by the Romanian judge, by a Romanian court. They were held detained for a period of time, if we're using the American standard, unconstitutionally. Why am I using the American standard even though it's in another nation? Sure, nations and countries can have their own ways of creating laws, but the American standard is necessary to provide individual rights, human rights, to everyone else in other nations. This is what we want to propose to other nations so that everyone else, not just Americans, have the same types of rights and due process no matter where you are in the world. That's not a practical reality for a lot of people. Obviously, America is a totally different system, but if we could apply it, we would, because we want to make sure that people are not politically prosecuted and they're being charged for a crime that they committed, and they're not being indefinitely detained for nonsensical reasons. We know that Romania is potentially tied, well, Romania is corrupt in itself, but it is potentially tied, this case, to elites in other nations who wanted to silence the Tates because of how popular they were getting, and they were circumventing a lot of status quo systems in place culturally. And so that was threatening to a certain power position, a certain narrative that was designed to attack the Western Front and create a cultural degradation of men, specifically men, for various reasons. When you have the men who typically go out and start the rebellions, they push against that threshold of where the elites are ruling. That's a no-go. That's considered a threat. So you have to weaken the men. The majority are men that you have to weaken. You weaken them, and that reduces the threshold. So now the elites can keep ruling over the people without any type of barrier, any type of pushback, and it takes longer and longer for that anguish to rile up, and it's harder to actually push against that threshold. So now the Tates are in the residency. We can imagine what it would be like to be in jail where maybe you're not able to go out. You can only see your brother a few times a week, if even that. And so you're alone. Maybe you have the book like the Quran, so you have some significant writings to review over and think about life and existence, morality. You're going to be planning your next steps. You may not have a piece of paper and a pen. Maybe he did, maybe he didn't. But mentally, you're planning out your next steps. So he's coming back. Now, the Tates understand that they have to play a legal game. They're still in Romania. They're still tethered to that judicial and executive system. They have a residence in the UAE. They like the UAE. They've converted to Islam. So that is the trajectory that they're going in. Now, Romania has many different reasons why they went after the Tates, potentially because he said that they were corrupt and he could leverage that to his opportunity. And they wanted to prove a point and say that you're not going to leverage ourselves against whatever interests you have. He was converting to Islam and now removing himself from that Christian point of view. He was potentially money laundering or evading taxes, and Romania wanted a piece of the action. These are all speculative, right? We're conjuring up ideas here. No formal charges were actually pressed. So you have Tate. He's planning a strategy, definitely, to go to the UAE. He has to do this in a very tactful way because right now he's still in that geographical region of Romania. If he messes up at any point, or there is word that he's a flight risk, there will be dire consequences for that. Now, that's a whole game in itself. We don't know if that's going to take months or years to overcome to be able to move to a different residence in the UAE, to another nation. But just from this point of view, if you were in prison and jail for 3.5 months, you have to be able to overcome your mind. You have to be able to overcome mental anguish. You have to be able to overcome yourself when you're alone for that period of time. Actually, when a lot of people go into solitary confinement, not saying he was strictly in solitary, but that's very harmful for your brain. You're degrading your socialization. You're degrading your mental faculties. You're degrading your cognition. So this is a very stressful, mentally stressful, internally stressful period of time when you're locked up. Let's say whether you're guilty or innocent, you're locked up and you have to sit and you have to think with your own thoughts for 24 hours a day for 3-4 months on end. If you can overcome that and you can come out of this with a rational point of view, yes, you're going to be humbled a little bit. You're influenced by your environment. So if you're being forced by a bigger, more powerful entity to submit, you're going to be humbled. he may use religion as a way to convert that humility into something positive, but he still has to come up with a plan. Now, I don't know if he's overcome that mentally, but if he does overcome that mentally, his next strategy will be one of the catalysts to opening up the movement of masculinity. We've seen that the Western Front, forget about the East, but the Western Front is degrading rapidly. Men are becoming women, women are becoming men. We're seeing our fiscal policy decline, our general political policy, our rule of law, or law and order, that's declining. We're seeing so many areas decline. This typically happens when we reach a pleasure-seeking society. It's the peak of the pleasure-seeking society. Eventually, people end up where we're going now, where there's a lot of delusion, a lot of fantasy land thinking. No one is tied to reality. We're not really exporting any resources. Right now we're exporting entertainment, but we don't know how long that's going to last because other nations are creating entertainment of their own. But if he can be one of the catalysts, because he'll have a stream, right? There's two ways he can have a stream. He's on Rumble now. He may go on and have a soft stream where he introduces himself back. He's very humble. And then when he's able to get out of the legal situation that he's in and move to the UAE, he'll have a hard stream. And that is really coming back at full force, saying what he thinks, saying it like it is, and preaching the truth. He has to do that because that's a strategic situation where he realizes he has to be humble and soft right now until he's in a better position, until he's in a better environment. He may not even have a stream at all. He may just post little things on social media just to showcase a form of marketing. Hey, this is what I'm doing. Here are some clips of me just thinking. Here are some words and sentences, phrases, statements that have been going through my mind. He may not actually have a video stream where he's coming back in full force and preaching his ideology like he was before. And so he has to be very smart. But if he can be the catalyst, whether it's in 6 months or a year, for a new type of, it's the same movement, but it's going to be reimagined, reinvented. That will spark something innovative within the world, okay? Mostly in the West. When you have young men who, they've already seen Andrew Tate, but once they see what he's gone through, and he's effectively a martyr, just how Trump is effectively being a martyr right now through all the indictment charges. He hasn't been formally charged, but charged by indictment. A lot more people are willing to support and get behind someone because they're seeing that the establishment, the status quo, is attacking them, and there's nothing proper of what they're charging them with. And so there's a type of righteousness that you have to support these people, to support these movements, because you see that there's a false god. There are a false god, demagogues who are ruling the world, ruling the status quo, and they don't want to have their power challenge. They don't want to see the people rise up and be awake to the truth. They don't want the people to attack their status in the hierarchy. They want to maintain their position, and they're willing to create a facade to deceive people in order to achieve that. Once you're able to go behind the curtains and expose what's happening, to expose the facade, you're a threat to the status quo. But if you can do that effectively and you can get people on your team, you now have a massive movement that serves, again, as a way to not necessarily swing the pendulum back to where we were, but to recreate a different future, a different future than what would have been if there were no catalysts for masculinity, for law and order, for having a meritocracy, for having economic rights, for having individual rights. And so this is a much larger, this is just one person. But when you take all these different people, okay, there's a lot of people out there, Russell Brand, Tate, Trump, there's a lot of people out there who are serving as catalysts. And once a larger majority of the minority wake up, now we can actually form a movement that is global. It's not only isolated in different pockets of the Western Front, but it's more of a global stance, and people are aware about it. A lot of people know these names. A lot of people know who Tate is. A lot of people know who Trump is. But do people really resonate with them? Do people know their message, their ideology, their movement? When you have a martyr, and you have so many of them concentrated in a given period of time, you're awakening people. It's like what happened during the pandemic. Very quick lockdowns, no rule of law. Very quick, your loss and degradation of individual rights. This woke a lot of people up. And that was something that the status quo, the establishment, did not predict. And that was a hit on their scoreboard. They suffered from that. And we're seeing repercussions, positive repercussions, of how we can actually change what's happening in the world, and we can protect ourselves and have a better future, because we're seeing all of these things come together that promote the proper ideology, that promote a better way of living, a higher standard of living, a way to have our liberty and our freedom, our ability to even just freely speak. It's so vital, so important. And when enough average people see this, they don't have to fully commit to the cause, but they're there in support, and they know that this movement is occurring. And it only takes a few things at the right time to happen to make this an achievement.